Pugh, and I'm the Executive Director of ACT, Autism Community Training. This is the 7th in a series of web streams that we've been having since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, because we wanted in particular to provide families with some information and support. One of the areas that we worked a lot on is mental health, because a lot of our children, whatever their age, and parents have been under tremendous stress. It's always very stressful when families are coping with new events, and not being able to predict the future for children with autism is extremely challenging. And I don't think I need to tell this audience that. So we're very grateful that Dr. Anthony Bailey and Dr. Susan Fawcett. Dr. Anthony Bailey is from UBC. He's the chair of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Susan Fawcett is joining us from the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation, where she is the director. I have to check this. She's the director of therapy, behavior, and family support. And her PhD thesis was on the issue of stressors and supporting families. So we thought that it would be a perfect opportunity, when she started telling me about her research, to invite her to present to us. And so today we're doing it as an informal discussion between Dr. Bailey and Dr. Fawcett to explore the whole issue on practical tips for helping families reduce stress. So I'm going to turn it over first to Anthony Bailey.
Thank you very much, Deborah, and welcome to everybody who's watching from home. Susan, I think it'd be really helpful if you could tell people who are watching a little bit about yourself, and also about the organization you work for and where I think you're calling from today.
I am. Yes, I'm very happy to be back in the office where I have a good internet connection, unlike at my home. So I've been here at the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation for coming up on 17 years, which seems like a really long time. And for the first 10 years of that, I was the head speech and language pathologist here. And then I noticed a lot of I couldn't get at a lot of the behavioral issues in a lot of the kids, and I was noticing some mental health issues as well. And so I went back to school and recently completed my PhD at UBC in the Educational and Counseling Psychology and Special Ed department, with some people here that might be quite familiar to this crowd. So the wonderful Dr. Joe Lucician and Dr. Pat Miranda. And I learned a lot about family-centered positive behavior support from them. Since finishing school, I've moved into this new director role. And then, in terms of the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation, we actually are celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. So not quite the big party that we were hoping for in 2020. But hopefully later we'll be able to celebrate all together. We are a nonprofit organization, and times are tough for us in the moment, like they are for lots of charities. But we're managing okay. We've got a lot of telehealth sessions running, which is wonderful. So we're an organization that's primarily focused on providing resources to families and professionals, as well as a service provision organization. So I think we're now up to about a dozen therapists and teachers, so SLPs and occupational therapists, and we provide services for kids with Down syndrome, but also kids with any sort of developmental disability. And I always say kids, but really I mean across the lifespan. We have a really wonderful, caring, smart group of people here, and I feel really blessed to work here for sure.
Great. So this afternoon we're talking about helping families reduce stress. But is it only families of children with special needs who are stressed by the current pandemic?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think everybody at this point is feeling the effects of this pandemic to some degree or another. Even people who weren't, particularly prone to, experiencing a lot of stress or anxiety are now feeling some of those things. And, I think that sentiment of we're all in this together is really lovely and quite comforting for a lot of us. But I think for our parents of kids with developmental disabilities, this may not be so much the case. I think some of them are feeling quite alone and like they're not, that other people are not experiencing the same kinds of things that they are. And so the difference for families of kids with developmental disabilities is that they were already stressed to begin with, even before COVID came along, right? And so we know that families who have kids with developmental disabilities who also have the risk factors of problem behavior, medically complex kids who don't sleep very well, are all definitely at risk. Those families are at risk of experiencing more stress than the rest of us. And of course, those three risk factors pretty much describe most of our families that we see. So, that same group of parents is also quite vulnerable to experiencing clinical levels of anxiety and depression. And so this pandemic has likely just exacerbated a lot of those things for this group of parents.
So what do you think are the specific factors associated with the pandemic that have made life so much harder for so many families?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things here. Certainly, you have to begin with, there's no longer breaks from your kids, right? So parents are with their kids 24/7. And then on top of the no breaks, you also have the fact that the parents might be feeling guilty about wanting or needing more breaks from their kids. And then on top of that, we also have the fact that we are uncertain about when the parents will get breaks, right? So we don't know what's around the corner for this pandemic, and so parents might be thinking this is going to go on for a long time and that sort of thing. And we know that kind of uncertainty also is a major contributing factor to stress and anxiety. So there's the breaks piece. There's also financial stressors for a lot of these families, and I know ACT has already done another webinar talking about, some of that, the advocacy piece and the financial piece, the withdrawal of usual supports. So, the fact that some families may have had behavioral interventionists coming in on a regular basis, and now maybe that's not happening as much. And there are also a lot of us at DSRF, therapists and teachers, have been finding that a lot of the parents will express that they're feeling a lot of guilt about being a not very good parent because they're allowing their child too much screen time, for example. Or they're an inadequate teacher with all of this virtual learning that's going on. And then worrying constantly about, when is this going to end? And when am I going to get to go back to just being a parent and not having to be a teacher as well? And then one final thing I wanted to mention there's another unique stress too around for these families, that some of even the good things that have been happening for some of us with this pandemic may actually also be contributing to stress in our families. So one example of that is a bit of information overload. So we know that, there's a lot of webinars out there. ACT has been doing a really great job. DSRF, we have a Learn at Home site on our website, a section on our website that's meant to make teaching kids at home a bit easier and giving parents ideas. But that in itself can be stressful because you feel like you're not doing enough and that sort of thing. So the other thing that is quite unique is another example is even things like, at 7 o'clock, lots of communities now, we have this wonderful response where we all, there's a lot of hooting and hollering in our neighborhoods and lots of pots and pans being crashed around, and which is really fun for a lot of us and definitely makes me feel better when I hear it. But for kids with sensory issues, this is a really hard thing to get through. And then there can be a lot of anticipatory worry about it, like when is that going to happen? Is it coming soon? And then moms and dads are also worried about it. So there's some kind of unique stressors as well when we think about this group of parents.
So I've realized that we use the word stress as though everybody automatically knows what it is, but of course it's different things to different people. So when you use the word, what do you mean by stress? Is it a sort of simple thing, or is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, it is a very complicated thing. So there's certainly, a lot. We could spend this entire hour talking about just the definition of stress. It's a really hard thing to define. And there are a few contributing factors to that. One of which is that when we talk about stress in sort of a colloquial everyday fashion, we actually talk about it as both a cause and an effect. So we sometimes talk about, oh, that one thing really stressed me out. So there was a stressor in my environment. But we also talk about, I'm feeling really stressed out today. So that's more the result side. So that's one thing that's makes it a bit tricky. Another thing is that even, something can be an environmental effect, an environmental event can be experienced by one person as a stressful thing and another person as not. So everybody's definitions of stressors can be different. So for example, I find roller coasters and the thought of them extremely stressful, but Tony, you might be a roller coaster aficionado, right? That might be your thing. So we all have different things that we, find stressful. I really like to cook Thanksgiving dinner for loads and loads of family and friends and make lots and lots of food. But for some people, that's terrifying and wholly unappealing, right? So that makes it a little bit difficult too. The other thing is that we don't want to always think about stress as a bad thing. It's not always a bad thing. So, if we didn't have a little bit of stress or positive, if we think of it now as a positive challenge rather than a negative threat, if we didn't have a little bit of that during our days, most days, we likely wouldn't get as much accomplished. So I think we all work quite well with sort of a looming deadline, right? And that's a stressor that makes us more productive. But even though stress can be adaptive or helpful, there's a problem that develops if stress gets into that territory of being pervasive or unrelenting. And then it's kind of this constant companion, right? That's with you all the time. And in that zone, productivity actually decreases. That's kind of that feeling, that's really yucky feeling of overwhelm that a lot of us will get if the stress just gets to be too much. And in that zone, a lot of us come to a halt, right? That's where, we just can't really function anymore. And that's sort of the concern during this pandemic situation with parents who were already experiencing some stress, and now we add on the pandemic stress. You want to socially distance yourself from this constant stress companion, basically, right? That would be a really good thing to do. And then the last thing I want to just mention with the whole idea of stress is we have to also take into consideration the physical effects of stress. So if you are having just a little bit of stress, then you might get things like, your heart starts to beat a little faster, or you start to breathe a little more rapidly or shallowly. You might get some muscle tension in your neck or your shoulders, and we can deal with those things if they happen once in a while. And those things can actually help propel us forward through a stressful situation. But if those things are in this unrelenting, constant companion sort of, if they've taken on that flavor, then that's not so good, because then we can get lasting physical and mental health issues, right? So then we start talking about cardiovascular disease and depression and anxiety. And another thing that can happen, and this is particularly relevant in when there's a virus floating around, is a diminished immune system response. Right, so we definitely want to make sure that parents are taking it seriously, right? That they really are tending to managing and trying to counteract the stress.
Yes, I think it's the sort of pervasiveness and never-ending nature that's particularly difficult about this, with no one really knowing how long it's going to go on for. And so I've had many adult patients who have become much more sensitized to minor physical ailments, which I think they've simply become more aware of because they're generally sort of over-aroused and hyper-alert. I think also there are lots of people who probably are stressed but are not aware they're stressed, which is interesting, in that you need to realize it's a problem before you can do something about it. So in terms of the doing something about it, I sort of got the impression that this is so complicated that there's unlikely to be one single thing that we all need to do. Is that right?
I would definitely agree with that. You definitely want to take a multi-pronged approach. So definitely, I'm going to throw out a bunch of ideas, and people are going to take what works for them, and they're not going to take some of the others, and that's okay. If you can come away from today with one or two things that you can add into your daily repertoire that might help combat some of this stress, then that would be great. So we can kind of think about, ideally it would be great if we could get rid of the stressor entirely, right? So, but we can't do much about the COVID situation. And, we can certainly help stop the spread of the illness by doing the things we're already doing, the vigorous, thorough washing of hands, and the staying home whenever we can. There's some element of agency there, but in terms of actually being able to predict what's going to happen, that stressor isn't going away, that uncertainty isn't going away, and so we can't really do anything about that. And it's not like you can and go and take your child who has a developmental disability and is each day now exhibiting more and more problematic behavior and drop them off at school or daycare, right? Because they just might not be open right now. One thing that you can do, though, is kind of evaluate and see if there are any, sorry about that. I had something on the side here that just decided to fall.
I think that's what we call noises off.
That's right. So you can, though, kind of evaluate and see if there are any things that are extraneous, any stressors that are extraneous or unnecessary in your life. And the one that popped into my head recently was, if there are, we're all doing a lot of this like FaceTime or Zoom sessions and that kind of thing. And doing too much of that can actually be a little bit stressful. They're now talking about something called Zoom fatigue, right? So ensuring that you're not doing too much of it, but also thinking about the people who you're interacting with. When you get off of that Zoom call, are you feeling energized and excited and happy, and that person made you laugh a lot and you feel more relaxed, maybe those kinds of things? Or are you feeling a bit drained, right? So just thinking about those kinds of things and whether or not you can get rid of some of those those kind of unnecessary stressors.
I like your comment about being zoomed out.
It's a thing.
I'm naturally rather a fidgety person. I think one of the things I find difficult is not being able to move around and shift my position, because otherwise there's a danger I'll go off camera. Or
that's right. Yes, or worse. That's right. See, and I fidgeted a little tiny bit, and look what happened. Something fell off my desk. So it's not good.
Anxiety that my rather loud dog may interrupt any
Right. Yeah.
Yes. I think you have a cat that's
Yes, my
grown.
cat likes to, this is one of the reasons I'm here. The internet connection is better, but also the cat likes to walk in front of my screen, which is not bad when you're working with teens and adults who are experiencing some mental health issues and have low mood. I mean, it can kind of lighten the mood. It's good. But yeah, so the other thing we can do that might be a bit easier to do, since we can't get rid of these giant stressors that are currently present, is think about how we can modify reactions to stress, right? So, and this is where, so when I did my dissertation project, I ran a family center positive behavior support parent training program for parents of kids with Down syndrome and problem behavior. And actually some of those kids were duly diagnosed with autism as well. And we targeted in that program both strategies to manage child behavior, but also strategies to manage parent stress. And so that's what I would love to talk about now, because we found these things quite helpful. So there were a few things. One of them was cognitive behavior change methods. The second one was self-care, parent self-care, but also caring for the whole family and ways to do that. And then the third one was developing a regular mindfulness meditation practice.
Okay, so the first one sounded very technical.
Oh yeah, it does sound very technical. I know.
Yes.
Could
you translate that into English for me?
I definitely can. So cognitive behavior change methods, or cognitive behavior therapy, is something that basically is about changing essentially your unhelpful patterns of thoughts or behavior that are kind of contributing to some not so good experiences you may be having. So, things that you're currently finding problematic, basically, about your life. So, it's certainly something, CBT is certainly something that has a lot of research evidence as being an effective approach for people who have anxiety or depression, but actually it's much more broadly applicable than that. And almost everybody can benefit from CBT approaches. So, this can be parents, which is why we employed it in our parent training program. I actually took a course that was recommended to me by my doctor. It was an online course on CBT for insomnia, because I was having trouble sleeping a few years ago, and I found that quite helpful. And I still, when I remember to use the strategies, it's still very helpful to me.
For people listening who may not know much about CBT, could you just explain ever so quickly what it involves?
Sure. So it's essentially the main component of it is what's called the CBT triad, which is essentially you're looking at three things: your cognitions, or your thinking, your behavior, and your feelings. And those are if you think about it as the points in a triangle. And the whole premise of it is that they all influence each other in both directions. And so I can take you through a little bit of an example, just so you get the idea of how this might work. So if I have, a situation where I'm taking a bite out of a cookie, okay, and I'm thinking to myself, so tasty, I just love chocolate chip cookies, this is really delicious, then I'm probably feeling pretty happy and pretty content, and my behavior that follows from that is likely going to be that I keep eating the cookie. However, that same exact situation with a different thought might have a very different result in terms of my behavior and my feelings. So if I now take a bite of the cookie, and I at first think, but then I think, oh, what about those 3 pieces of birthday cake I already had for breakfast today? now I'm not feeling so good. I'm now probably feeling a bit disappointed in myself. I might be feeling a bit guilty about now eating another cookie, and that might actually make me put the cookie down. So that same situation, the way we think about it is going to impact the way we feel and behave. And that's kind of the main tenet of CBT. So problems often begin with unhelpful thoughts about situations that make us not feel very good and make us behave sometimes in ways that we prefer not to. The one thing that's interesting about CBT, I think, well, there's lots of things that are interesting about it, but one thing that's really interesting is that it kind of requires you to be quite tuned into your internal dialogue. So, some people are really in tune with this already. So some people are very in tune with the kind of running dialogue that happens inside their brains as they move through their days. And some people aren't aware of it at all. And so, you might have to sort of try a little experiment to try and tune yourself into this a little bit. So if what you can do is, if you notice that there is a shift in your mood, so either you start feeling, much more stressed about something or much more anxious, or you start feeling a downshift in your mood, but there's no external cause, like, if we were actually in the same room and you took that cookie out of my hand, that would obviously make me feel sad. But if I was just kind of driving along or washing dishes and I started to feel sad, then that's probably something that's going on up here that's caused me to feel that way. And so one thing you can do to increase your awareness of this is to ask yourself in those situations, what was I just thinking? And usually people can identify what that was, right? You're either thinking about how the virtual learning session with your kid didn't go well earlier today, or you're thinking about all the things you have to get done tonight after your kids go to bed, right? And that causes your mood to shift downwards. And there are kind of a couple of broad categories, I think, of unhelpful thought patterns, or these are sometimes referred to as thinking traps, that parents may be experiencing right now. And one of the categories is more kind of related just to COVID, specifically in the pandemic. And the other one is more about like parenting in this situation. So thoughts about COVID in general might be things like, when is this going to end? Like, this is going to go on forever. Or I cannot take another day stuck in this house with these people, right? Those kinds of things. The more parenting side of things might be something like, oh man, I can't believe I let her watch like 4 hours of YouTube today. I'm such a bad parent. Right? That kind of thing. Or I'm so lousy at teaching my kid. Like I can't get the hang of it. Right? And having that dialogue in your head, what that's going to do in that last example of the I'm so lousy at teaching my child is it going to make you feel good? No. It's going to make you feel crummy. It's going to make you feel inadequate, guilty, sad, maybe. It's definitely not going to make you feel ready to take on the world, right? So what it'll probably do is make you less likely to try with your child if you keep having those kinds of thoughts. So one CBT strategy that parents could use here is called cognitive reframing. And that's essentially, you're going to kind of shift the narrative a little bit about the thought that's going on inside your head. And so I'll give you some examples. So for that, when is this going to end kind of thought, reminding yourself about some of the good things about this pandemic, like, I haven't worn real pants in 2 months. That's kind of cool. I've just been wearing my pajama pants all day, every day. Or more time with my family if you are actually enjoying that. If you're having the thought, I cannot possibly take another day stuck in this house. I need to get out. I need to do things. Reminding yourself that one really powerful thing you can do is remind yourself that you've actually been successful in the past. So at this point, I don't know how many days we are in now, like 64 or something like that. Reminding yourself, I've already done this for 64 days. I got this. I can keep going. Right? You actually have been successful. So it's not a case of, you're basically disputing the thought. right? You're saying, this actually isn't true. I can stand another day stuck in this house because I've been doing it for a long time already. And then in terms...
Can I just ask?
Yeah.
I could imagine there might be some parents who would be hard pressed to think of a single good thing about the pandemic. Not many, but I'm sure there are people out there. What could they do to reframe in the way you're suggesting?
Well, if you can't think of anything good, then I would just sort of try to soften what you've said, right? So just kind of try to soften make it not so harsh. So instead of just focusing on when is this going to end, making yourself think about, just something else that the next couple of things that you have to do, for example, right? And reminding yourself that you can get through it, essentially. But you're right, there's going to be people who, and I have talked to people who definitely have not been able to come up with much that's positive. It's a good challenge to try and do it, for sure. And then just a couple more examples. So for the parent who's saying, oh, I let them watch 5 hours of YouTube today, reminding yourself, but actually we also did today a 45-minute session of reading, and my little dude has never done that before, and that was a big accomplishment for the two of us, and focusing on that instead. So taking it is a kind of about trying to find the good stuff, right? The one about I'm lousy at teaching my kid. I mean, I think here, honestly, what you need to do is remind yourself that actually you did not sign up for this. You did not go to school to become a teacher. You're not really supposed to be doing it. And you're doing the best you can, right? I think that's really the point there with that one.
Can I just ask? Quite often, if I'm having negative thoughts, I can do some of the things you're suggesting and flip it around and think of a good aspect. And then, of course, it disappears from my head before I've realized it. Are you a believer in people writing things down or not?
Oh yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think you have to decide what works best for you. Right. I'm not a big fan of writing. I find it quite an aversive activity. So for me, that wouldn't work very well. But I think if you, yeah, I know it was silly. I don't know why I didn't think of that before I started the PhD. But writing 220 pages at the end was not the most fun for me. I'm not going to lie. But I think for some people, actually writing it down and having a list there to remind you of all the things that you thought of, and actually maybe reviewing that on a regular basis is a very good idea, right? For the days that you aren't able to find anything good. And I'm sure there are lots of parents who are having days like that. Yeah.
So we started with the cognitive.
Yes. Yes.
I remembered the last bit was mindfulness, but there was something in between.
So the one in between is about self-care. So finding some time to engage in some form of activity that's going to allow you to care for yourself. So, in a previous ACT webinar, I think it was the positive behavior support one, the first one, when Dr. Richard Stock was talking, he talked about that, classic example of the oxygen mask, right? And that if you are not taking care of yourself first, then then your kidlet isn't going to do very well either. You need to definitely make sure you are taken care of first. So I will throw in another sort of cliche to go along with that one, which is that this pandemic is a marathon, right? Not a sprint. So parents are definitely having to pace themselves. If you're going to get through this long haul as a parent, you've got to engage in some self-care. Otherwise, it isn't one of those things that's just really short, and you know how there are times in your life and you just say, well, I'm just going to push through it and then I can have a vacation, right? I'm going to work every day, all day, every day, and then I can have a vacation. This is not one of those times, right? So
when I hear the phrase self-care,
yeah,
sort of reminds me of going to the spa or
right.
something.
Wouldn't that be nice?
What does self-care look like for men?
Oh, for men. Oh, that's a good one. Well, maybe when I give some examples, you can pull out a few there, or maybe you can add some of your own. If I don't have enough that are appropriate for men, then you should definitely add some. They might be a bit too feminine, but obviously right now I'm not going to suggest going to the spa because that's
Right.
not even possible. So just the other thing to keep in mind about the self-care piece and why you want to do it is that, and I'm not saying this to heap more guilt onto parents, but if you are stressed and anxious and not feeling good, then that impacts your child, right? And your child's behavior. And a lot of parents are having trouble with their child with developmental disabilities, problem behavior. And so it definitely will negatively impact their behavior. And so again, I'm not saying that for you to now reflect and go, oh, I should not be so stressed around my child. This is terrible. I'm a bad parent. I just want you to be aware of it so that you can now prioritize and make sure that you're getting some self-care in so that you can do something about that. So that maybe you aren't appearing so stressed and anxious in front of your child. What I don't want people to do is just bottle it up and pretend that they're happy. That's not going to be a good idea either. So what are some things we can do that will help? And also, how do we do this? Because I know for sure right now there are lots of parents who are like, well, I just do not have time, Susan. I just can't. Like, where am I going to get this? I don't have time for an hour-long bubble bath with candles, right? Like, obviously we can't go to the spa right now, but this is what I want people to think about now are a couple of things. So number one, little tiny chunks of self-care add it up over time. So even if you're doing none right now and you can build in just 5 or 10 minutes here and there, that will really help. Something is definitely better than nothing, right? So the other thing to keep in mind is maybe perhaps doing some creative co-parenting. So making sure that both of you in a 2-parent family have some time where you are able to tend to your own needs, right? So agree to spell each other off. And I mean, I'm not trying to cause fights between couples here, but maybe talk about which one of you needs it more right now. Because maybe dad is the one who's more stressed out by this situation, and maybe dad needs to have a full 2 hours on Saturday so he can golf, right? Yeah, so it could definitely be either. If you're not in a 2-parent household, you can use older siblings to your advantage, right? Or siblings of the child with the developmental disability. Or now that we're allowed to sort of increase our bubbles a little bit, some extended family members or close friends could also, contribute to some respite. And then, so the things, my ideas for what you can do, these are going to be very individualized. And again, it definitely, or if there are some that are more appropriate for the male part of the population, I would love to hear your ideas. I did have a few kind of categories. So one being exercise as one of the first ones. So, and again, 5 or 10-minute chunks is fine, but we know that exercise, in whether there's a pandemic or not, exercise helps both mental and physical health, right? So we definitely want to be doing it. And so that can look like doing yoga, and that maybe not a very male-oriented thing, but I know, there's a YouTube channel that's free called Yoga with Adrienne. I think she's actually quite popular now, but she's very approachable and funny, and it's a really, really good way to combat stress. For sure, it got me through my PhD. So I would definitely, and some of them are quite short, so that's a bonus. But even if you can just fit in like a 5 or 10 minute workout or a 5 or 10 minute walk outside, because we know that nature is also quite healing. So getting outside is really important. But even like have a dance party, whether that's with your kid or not with your kid, or, in the event of I really don't have any time for myself, but I still need to get some exercise, why don't you do your kids' physiotherapy activities with them, right? Or their, occupational therapy activities if they're gross motor activities. So those, you can be a bit creative about how you can get that exercise in. And then there's kind of the relaxation sort of category of things as well. So this would be things like yoga kind of straddles both relaxation and exercise. But there's also, deep breathing, like kind of that idea of breathing in for 3, holding for a count of 4, and letting your breath out for 5, because we know that if you have a lengthier exhale than an inhale, that actually calms your nervous system. If you do mindfulness, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, that can be a good idea as well. And then there's, a whole host of miscellaneous other reward-based activities, like can you get out of the house and go for a drive with some loud music blaring for a bit that's not the music that your children make you listen to, that same song that you have to listen to over and over and over again in the car every time you go out. Maybe you choose a song that you like, or books, Sudoku puzzles, crosswords. These are all things that you can do in quite small chunks. What about those adult coloring books, right? Or heck, even take one of the coloring pages out of your own kids' coloring books if you don't have an adult coloring book. It can be quite meditative to do that. And then the last kind of category of things I wanted to talk about was the idea of making sure that you're building in some fun and some humor and some silliness into your day. Because I think that, of course, this is not a lighthearted situation in general, and some parents are feeling extremely stressed. And I don't mean to make light of that, but I think we really, in those cases, we just have to work a bit harder to make sure we're having a little bit of fun and that we have a sense of humor about things. So I really am a big fan of kind of short little YouTube clips. So, Saturday Night Live skits, or one of my favorite things to look at are cute animal videos. So I urge everybody to Google, I think it's if you Google sloths in buckets or buckets of sloths, something like that. And then if you watch that and it's like 2 minutes long, and you are still stressed at the end, I would be very surprised. It is very wonderful. So, and again, having more of those kind of Zoom meetings and FaceTime meetings that make you laugh, right? And making sure you build some of those in. You will note that I did not say in that long list of things, I didn't talk about scrolling through Instagram or Facebook. And the reason for that is because we know even in non-pandemic times that those things actually tend to either suppress mood or increase anxiety. And so because there are a lot of posts about that are kind of COVID related, or, there's a lot of news out there right now that you can just click on and start reading about. That's actually, if you really enjoy doing that, then go for it. But I would urge you to pick some of these other things instead. But I will stop talking. What are some good male-oriented things we could do? Would you find any of those appealing?
I think exercise always has to be the list. I know that gym equipment shops sold out of everything within a few weeks of the pandemic starting. Yeah. But in fact, one can simply do body weight exercises that don't require any equipment. And as you say, there's lots of stuff on YouTube that will guide you through every imaginable type of exercise. I think dads are often more likely to be the ones that go play ball or catch or football or hockey or something with their kids. There are always things to make, whether it's real things for the house or models or tinkering with the car or washing the car. The people who have gardens all tell me that they find getting out in the garden is very relaxing. And of course, I think people who have pets are very grateful at the moment that they have them, as they seem to be very relaxing indeed. The thing that occurred to me is I think the people who are probably suffering, particularly at the moment, are single parent households, in part because you haven't got anyone to, on the one hand, share the burden of all these responsibilities with, or just to confide how it's getting to you and how miserable it's making you feel. That's very difficult, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with you. My heart really goes out to single parents right now, and for those parents, it is really crucial that they, try to find some respite, and get some breaks, and make sure that they are prioritizing having some connection with friends via phone calls or virtual meetings. Yeah, even if it's late at night when their children are finally in bed, right? Yeah.
So the last thing on your list, I think, was mindfulness, which sounds rather touchy-feely. What's that all about?
It is, I guess you could think of it as touchy-feely, but I do think it's actually quite useful even for the touchy-feely averse. It's definitely something that we can all benefit from. Anybody can do it. It's certainly gained more recognition in recent years. I think I hear more people kind of nodding now if I talk about it. Oh yeah, I know what that is. I think what makes it sometimes seem a bit over here unapproachable maybe for some people is that it's a meditation practice, and meditation is often synonymous with some kind of religious practice. And so it is true that contemplative practices like meditation or prayer are a part of all major religions, but you may have noticed that mindfulness has become mainstream at this point, not unlike the way we were just talking about yoga, right? That yoga has become mainstream, even though it was originally a Hindu practice, right? So it's definitely, these things take on a mainstream life of their own. And we are talking about, when I talk about mindfulness, we're definitely talking about the secular practice that is more that's been adapted to improve and maintain mental health and wellness, essentially. So what it is I'll give you the definition by Jon Kabat-Zinn, who was one of the first people to adapt this practice from Buddhism into kind of the health realm. He was the one who founded the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. Is that it's paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment. And most commonly that's attending to your breath. So your breathing. And the reason why mindfulness is a really good idea, I mean, there's actually many reasons why. It has a lot of benefits. So lots of research actually shows that for parents of kids with developmental disabilities, it's a very good idea to engage in a regular mindfulness practice. It has a whole host of benefits, like obviously not only parenting related, but also reducing stress and anxiety, which of course, both those things are important right now. So there's a few different things. So they tend to have increased satisfaction with their parenting skills, improved social interactions with their kids, improved sleep is another one, and improved presence during parenting tasks. So it's really a good idea for parents to have a regular mindfulness practice. And when I say regular mindfulness practice, I'm kind of talking about 5, 10, or up to 20 minutes a day, a few days a week. But don't be scared off by the 20 minutes. It's totally fine to start with just a few.
So, Susan,
yeah.
If I'm watching this and I want to give this a go, what do I do? How do I practice mindfulness?
Well, may I take you through it just very briefly?
Will it hurt?
No, it will not hurt.
Okay.
It will not. It should do the exact opposite of hurt. So essentially what it is you're going to basically feel the breath moving in and out of your body very naturally. It's this moment by moment experiencing. There's an expectation that your mind will wander, but when it does, you're just going to gently bring it back to focusing on your breath. And so we can do a quick little version now. So what you want to do first is make sure you're sitting, comfortably and with dignity. So you don't want to be too, stiff and upright, but you also don't want to be slouched down in your chair. I find it helps to sit a bit forward of the back of my chair when I'm doing it. So the bottoms of your feet should be flat on the floor, and your hands can be kind of folded in your lap, or they can be resting palms down on your lap. And as we begin, you can actually now either close your eyes, or you can just gaze down like I'm doing at about a 45-degree angle. You should have a soft focus. You don't want to be staring at what's in front of you, but rather just keeping a soft gaze. I actually find it helpful to have my eyes open rather than closed, because in mindfulness, it's really about becoming more awake and alert and aware. And sometimes, because parents, especially right now, are probably feeling very exhausted, if you close your eyes, you may just fall asleep. But do whatever feels most comfortable for you. So you want to start with a couple of deep breaths. So just in and out. So and as you do this, you'll feel your body start to soften. You'll become maybe more aware of physical sensations you're having, feeling the weight of your body on the chair, the soles of your feet on the floor. You might notice some sounds in the room. So some sounds may actually be quite prominent now, and yet this is the first time you're aware of them. And now you just want to let your breathing go back to normal if you haven't done so already. And at this point, we're not trying to change anything about our breath. We're just bringing our awareness to it. So there's no need now to breathe deeply or differently in any way. Just the plain old way you usually breathe is just fine. You may find it helpful to focus on one aspect of your breath. So for some people, that's the air going in and out of your nose, the rise and fall of your chest, your stomach moving in and out. So wherever you feel the sensation of the breath most is where you should focus. And what you want to do now is silently count each breath. So on each exhale, count 1, 2, and so on. Count to 10 breaths and then start again at 1. And you'll soon notice that your mind is wandering. And this is normal and natural. It's just what the mind does. You may find yourself thinking about what happened earlier today, or maybe you're thinking this feels really weird. But gently and without judgment, bring your awareness back to your breath. And you will likely have to do this again and again. And each time you bring your awareness back to your breathing, you can start your count again at 1. You don't have to try to remember where you left off before. So normally now, if this was not in a webinar format, I would say we would kind of be quiet for a couple of minutes and just focus on counting our breaths. But that might be a bit awkward given that this is a live webinar. So what you would do at the end, after you've had your few minutes of, just counting your breaths and bringing your attention back to your breathing, is just what you do is bring your attention back to the physical sensations in your body. If your eyes are closed, you're going to open them. You might have to have a little stretch, and just kind of pay attention to how you feel afterwards. Did you notice any difference, Tony, or you?
Well, in all truthfulness, you so quickly relaxed me that I was anxious you were going to hypnotize me, and that I would wake up having done something embarrassing. Once
I missed my opportunity.
Once I got over that, I really became aware of how heavy my shoulders felt.
Oh, good. That's good.
And once I got over that, eventually I just felt very peaceful.
Great.
So it definitely worked. Yeah.
Great. That is wonderful. And that's after a couple of minutes. And it won't be like that for everybody. For some people, it will feel a bit weird at first, especially people who have a lot of thoughts running through their brains. I'm not trying to say that you don't have a lot of, I'm sure you have many thoughts running through your brain.
That's very kind of you.
But some people tend to be quite anxious, and so they have a lot of worrying thoughts going through their brain, and it will take those people probably a lot longer to get used to it. And because I would also suggest that because this idea of sitting down and just focusing on your breath and not moving for 5 minutes can be a bit daunting for some people, that there are actually lots of guided meditations and mindfulness practices available online. So there's calm.com, which is actually CALM.com, and headspace.com. I really like both of those ones, and they actually have their paid subscription services, but they do have free things available right now for the duration of this pandemic, which is wonderful. So that are quite specific to things that people might be going through the pandemic. There's also the MindShift app that is done by Anxiety Canada, and that's free. And that one's really great because not only do they take you through a guided mindfulness practice, but there's also mental imagery. So kind of that idea of taking a mental vacation, which can be quite relaxing. Or I think they have a progressive muscle relaxation as well. So those are all, pretty great.
Okay. Out of the corner of my eye, I can see we've only got a few minutes left. So my final question is, do you have any advice for parents who think they've tried all of the different things that you've suggested, but nothing seems to work for them, and that they're feeling just as stressed as they were previously?
Yeah, and that can absolutely be the case. And I think there's two things to think about there. So one is, are you getting breaks? Because you can practice mindfulness for 20 minutes a day and you still need breaks from your kiddies. Mm-hmm. So definitely making sure that you have access to respite, whether it's likely in this situation going to be informal respite in the form of family members and that sort of thing, rather than, going through that formal process through MCFD, the at-home program, although that is an option as well. But also some parents may not benefit from this kind of minimal amount of guidance. So because their stress levels are too severe, or they're already experiencing a lot of anxiety or depression, and those parents need more individualized, intensive help. And so they want to access help from a registered clinical psychologist or a clinical counselor. And I do have a few ideas there of people who are actually providing telehealth sessions right now. So Dr. Catherine Martinez, who I did a practicum with, who's of the Behavioral Parent Training, she's wonderful with both parents and children alike, and she taught me everything I know about the CBT stuff. But you can go through her. She's on her own though, so she also gave a couple of other recommendations. So she said the North Shore Stress and Anxiety Clinic and Cornerstone Child and Family Psychology Clinic are two others that she would recommend. I would also highly recommend Eli Norman at Sojourn Counseling and the ABLE Clinic. He works for both, and he's actually in the trenches with a lot of these parents because he also has a daughter with Down syndrome. So he would be another great resource. And parents don't have to try to remember these names. I think Deborah said that I could put up a little addendum or a packet of information alongside this webinar when it gets posted. Yeah, so don't worry about, you know, frantically writing it all down.
So, Susan, I think sadly we've come to the end of our time, although you're welcome to relax me again in the future. I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Okay, great.
Deborah, I hope you're still there to bring us to a close. So we can't hear you.
Oh, yes,
I got so relaxed, I forgot about the mute button.
Great. Perfect.
But I did actually find it very helpful. And
I
appreciated all your comments about putting this in context for families who are single parent. And, you know, and I very much appreciated the understanding of families giving themselves a break and not expecting to suddenly become teachers or therapists or have the patience of Job. I mean, this is a tough time, but I thought that your suggestions were really helpful and clear and supportive of families. I wanted to thank both of you because it's lovely having that kind of informal conversation rather than it takes, I think, again, takes the pressure off us if we're following a conversation rather than trying to follow a presentation. So I'd be interested in hearing from our listeners whether this worked for them. But I wanted to say thank you to the two of you, but also to all of the presenters who volunteered for us over the last 7 presentations. It's really been a tremendous asset to have the community respond in the way they have, the professional community, advocates, and we've appreciated all the feedback from families in particular, and it's all been very positive. So that, of course, is very reinforcing for ACT. We now have 65 recordings on the ACT website. All are free. We keep saying free because people can't quite believe it, but they're free. And some of them are 2 days long. I mean, they're, you know, a 10-hour presentation, all beautifully chunked into, say, 10 to 15 minutes when you can spare some time. But I also took into account, Susan, what you were saying about people feeling that or parents feeling that they have to do it all, or that, you know, because they're not watching an ACT video every night, somehow they're failing. I think that the fact our families are doing a tremendous job, and I don't want, this is a resource, it's not a sort of one more thing to make people feel guilty about. I also want to thank CIRCA, which is a Center for Interdisciplinary Research and Collaboration in Autism at the University of British Columbia, and to thank the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation, because you've changed your name. So I'm hesitating there. Resource Foundation, to thank them for co-sponsoring this event and providing your professional services, Susan. I think it's a great example of collaboration across organizations, because I think all of us who work with families are trying our best to make sure that what we can provide in this situation is comforting, is practical. So this was a very much fit into what we've been working on. So thanks to the two of you and to everyone else who's made this series possible. And I think with that, I've brought to the end of the afternoon presentation, and enjoy the evening, everybody. I hope it's nice wherever you are in British Columbia. Bye-bye now.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.
And you, Susan. Goodbye.
Thank you, Tony and Deborah. Bye.
Bye.